A big thank you to the EU Life programme who funded this work. Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much indeed, Jan. It is indeed the case that I have been chair at Natural England for 5 years, which is the length of this project. And I've made various attempts, some of them successful, to engage with the work, and actually was meant to be here a year ago for the last major gathering of the project, but unfortunately got stymied by various diary complexities. But I'm delighted to be here today and to offer a warm welcome to everybody who's been working in this partnership to what is the beginning of the closing phase of the ReMEDIES programme, which is, by the way, a fantastic acronym, except if you try to remember it, it's hard. So I've written it down: reducing and mitigating erosion and disturbance impacts affecting the seabed. Great to capture that in one word. And today, of course, is the first step in drawing to a close the work that we've been doing together and laying the foundations, I hope, to making the most of all of the learning and experience that's been gained over the course of this period. And the key question of partnership, because these issues that we're dealing with as we lean into the nature and climate emergencies, there's an enormous amount of breadth and depth to all of these complicated subjects. And so working in partnership is absolutely critical. And that's why at Natural England, we've been delighted to be working with the Royal Yachting Association and their outreach programme, the Green Blue, the Ocean Conservation Trust hosting us today, the Marine Conservation Society, the Tamar Estuaries Consultative Forum, Plymouth City Council, and all working together to better understand how it would be possible to halt and then reverse a decline of key marine habitats. And very often when we hear about the climate and nature emergencies, our attention goes to land, to the tropical rainforests, to the role of agriculture and all of these subjects. But of course, the oceans are at the very heart of all of this, in how these two things collide together. And I guess if you're looking for a poster child issue that unites the ocean and nature crises, it would be things like the coral reefs now suffering from excessive heat stress, the acidification of the sea. But of course, on our own doorstep here in England, we have coastal ecosystems that are on the very front line of all of this. And of course, the seagrasses, which have been one of the key focal points of this, have been suffering a range of pressures for a very long time now, which are including the effects of extreme weather and rising temperature, but which is now exacerbating long-term pressures that have been there for many, many decades. The impacts of pollution, physical destruction, and indeed, in the case of those ecosystems, the consequences of disease. And when you look at all these things combined and what we're leaning into at the moment, there are some really shocking statistics to grapple with, including the well-founded estimate that we've lost more than 90% of our seagrass meadows over the last century, and the pressures that have been there all along, of course, continue to be in play, making the subject matter of this programme critical to understanding how we're going to be able to turn the tide that is affecting these systems in a way which is going to meet government targets, which are very ambitious and now framed in the context of a global biodiversity framework, which tells us that we need to be reducing and, where possible, eliminating extinction risk, protecting 30% of land and sea by 2030, and restoring the abundance of nature. And seagrasses are not only declining rapidly in this country, it's one of the habitats that is declining most rapidly across the world. And these systems are remarkable. This is the only group of flowering plants which live their full life cycle submerged in the sea, and they're pollinating with currents. And actually, I read some material recently suggesting that there might be pollinating invertebrates working in some seagrasses, moving pollen via the activity of worms and crustaceans, which is a remarkable thing, perhaps invoking a parallel with bumblebees on land as we understand how these hugely productive and biologically diverse systems work. They are truly unique. And in addition to having this wide range of codependent animals that live in them, of course, these systems are of huge of huge importance to people, and keeping them in a good quality state brings real dividends to society. And in the world we now live in, where conservation and nature recovery is often couched in the form of natural capital discussions and the idea of ecosystem services, these ecosystems are bringing us a wide range of benefits in terms of water quality, in terms of stabilizing coastlines and reducing erosion, being able to provide some resilience in the face of extreme weather. And they're catching carbon at the same time. And on top of that, they are nurseries for commercially important fish, including herring, pollock, and plaice. And if you start to add up the social value of all of that, you see that investing in the restoration of these kinds of ecosystems, it is a very sound thing for societies to put their money behind. Of course, and this project, having had a glimpse at some of the field work, has revealed the difficulty in understanding some of the dynamics of how these places function ecologically. And I went out with the Natural England dive team a few years ago on Studland Bay with a boat with the divers to try and gather some data around the state of the seagrasses that inhabit the seabed there. And of course, this is a particular hotspot where there had been some discussion around the impact of mooring gear on the seabed habitats, and a dire urgency of gathering really good data in order to be able to find solutions that could work for everybody, not just for the seagrasses and the conservation community, but also for the people who enjoy boating and use that piece of coast. And I was struck just by how much effort you need to put in to gather even a little bit of data. Having grown up as a terrestrial ecologist, putting a quadrat on a chalk grassland and sitting down with your eyepiece to identify the grasses and the plants, pretty straightforward compared to having to get a boat organised, all the safety gear, the air and everything else to be able to dive down to put a quadrat on the seabed. And of course, the data gathering and the work that's been going on across the country has been focused on key areas, special areas of conservation, part of the Natura 2000 network, to understand some of the pressures and how we might reverse them. And of course, this is a very important question when you understand the vital importance of the ecosystem services being provided. And I mentioned the ambition of government now in this country through the Environmental Improvement Plan to not only have 30% of the land and sea protected for nature, but also managed for nature. And the fact of those 5 special areas of conservation that we have as focal points for this work being in unfavourable condition really does raise a sense of urgency about all of this, because these are the best places. And if the best places are not in good condition, what does that say about the wider marine environment? So hopefully what we will be doing with this project is not only gaining a lot of insight and learning and experience, but able now over the years ahead to be applying that to be able to reverse this litany of decline that we have documented over so many decades. Because on top of all of those pressures I mentioned a moment ago, critical to understanding the future is how we're going to be able to deal with these recreational pressures that are affecting so many of these areas. And not only seagrasses, but also another key habitat that I know is found along this coast in the form of marl beds. These unusual seaweeds, purpley pinky structures on the seabed with their crystalline skeletons providing habitats to a wide range of organisms, including sea cucumbers, anemones, different kinds of worms, and easily damaged like seagrasses, including through the gear used by boats for mooring, and easily damaged and not very easy to recover. And actually, like seagrasses, an ecosystem which we know very little about in the greater scheme of things. I was amazed to see a headline that came on the BBC back in July documenting the discovery of a whole new marl bed off of the Roseland Peninsula on the coast of Cornwall. Amazing. that we are still finding these incredible natural assets that we didn't know about right on our doorstep, thereby underlining the need to get more data and more understanding as to how we're going to be able to protect and restore these places into the future. And our mission at Natural England is about thriving nature for people and planet, including thriving seas. And in order to do that, we need to understand how to stop the pressures that are bearing down on different marine habitats, and this work has enabled us to understand more about recreational pressures and to lay the foundations for being able to find ways into the future whereby people can continue to enjoy the sea, but doing that in a way which is going to protect these critical systems. And of course, once we gather data, and at Natural England we do a lot of this using science to help craft ideas for policy and practice. What's going to be most important now is the follow-through, and I believe this afternoon we have a session devoted to the afterlife of this project to be able to map out how we're going to take the learning that we've derived from this and to be able to apply it into the future, and not only what we've learned about disturbance and damage coming from recreational activities, but also what we might do using the work being done off the coast here to understand how we might restore seagrasses, hopefully at scale, into the future. So it's a big thank you from Natural England to all of our partners for this work. We're looking forward to taking it and using it for real impact into the future. And a big thank you also to the EU Life programme who funded this work over the last 5 years. Thank you very much indeed. And with that, I will hand over to Mark, who I think is going to take us into the next session. Okay. Got it.
Thank you very much, Tony. Tony has agreed to answer some questions if anybody has any. We have a Colin. So let's get a mic. If one of the Blue Meadows team could grab one of the mics, please, whether that's...
Yeah, Dave Kerno, I'm the local RYA rep. I was just wondering how, whether Natural England are going to put marine environments into the 10% biodiversity net gain project. Because I believe at the moment they're not included in any terrestrial net gain. And that would be a way of making sure that these sort of remedy projects are not sort of 3 to 5 years, but 30-year lifespan, and also fund them more reliably.
Yes, so that is work in progress. That is something that DEFRA has asked us to look at and to try and come with a framework to be able to do it. Obviously, the biodiversity net gain approach on land became live this last February, so we're just moving into a period of delivery there. There are various complexities at sea, but we're trying to work through them to find ways in which we can manage to achieve that uplift across the projects that are causing impacts on the sea and finding ways in which we can mitigate for them elsewhere. Various differences between the land and sea, one of which is the extent to which the land is owned by lots of different actors, whereas the sea less so, and finding ways of being able to create a sense of certainty into the future whilst recognising that nobody really owns it. And also taking that broad ecosystem approach and how we do that in the ocean, critically important, recognising that all of these different pressures, fishing, offshore renewables, land-based pollution, they're all kind of acting together. And so how we work through all of that to find ways of compensating for all of them, quite tricky. But it's work in progress, and we are committed to doing that.
Excellent. Elaine, I think, has a question.
In the end, of course, all of this is government. We advise, they decide. Just to add that nuance.
I think that blue mic's been switched off. Can you put that one that's just go at the back here?
Hello, Elaine Hayes, Chief Exec, Plymouth Sound National Marine Park. We're talking today a lot about seagrass. One of the things that directly affects seagrass is water quality, and we know that water quality is a major issue for species, habitats and people. So I just wonder how Natural England's going to bring its influence to bear to try and help us with the past state of water quality across seas and rivers in the UK.
Yeah, so huge issue, which is in the media every single day, linked to wastewater treatment in particular, also big issues linked with agriculture, amongst other things. So we're working on all of those with our colleagues at the Environment Agency to be able to find ways in which we can join up our approaches. Our principal responsibility linked to that is about protected areas, and we're doing quite a lot of work on land, but also linking to coastal ecosystems. The Solent comes to mind actually as one place where we've had a lot of activity trying to link compensation for pollution coming from new housing development to land use change. Sadly, from an ecological point of view, all we're doing with that really is holding the line, stopping things getting worse rather than coming with a remedy which is long term. But this does raise big questions. Two big sectors, and you'll know them very well, I'm sure. One which is investment into upgrading our wastewater treatment system, and the other one is what we're going to do about agriculture to be able to reduce nutrient pollution and soil coming off land going into coastal ecosystems. And so that again is work in progress. But government is, ambitious in all of this. We've got the Environmental Land Management Scheme, we have the Environmental Improvement Plan, both of which are being refined, and hopefully which over time will deliver the kind of changes that we know we need to deliver. But actually, I think this is one of the big challenges facing the country as we look at those nature recovery targets, is not only about the management and protection of key areas, it's about the overall environmental quality, which is affecting them as a result of decisions being taken miles away. And so the Solent is a good example of decisions being taken in a catchment, sometimes, 30, 40 miles away from there, and that pollution having this remote set of consequences. Same thing on land, big challenges with the management of Dartmoor that we're grappling with at the moment in order to be able to recover SAC quality ecosystems there. And a big part of that is linked with grazing, but also a big component of the challenge is linked with nitrogen deposition coming from atmospheric pollution, which is affecting the grassland communities. And so if we can't get a grip on those broader, more profound environmental challenges, we're going to struggle to do what we need to do with our protected areas. And, seagrass is another great example of that need for an integrated, joined-up catchment level approach. And again, government says it's committed to all of that. Challenge, as always, is about delivery. And delivery on these broad, complex subjects then always becomes one of partnership and how we can get cooperation between multiple landowners and land managers, official agencies, local government, house builders, water companies, you name it. And that's a piece of the knitting that we try to do at Natural England. And again, a great example here with this project of bringing multiple actors together to try and find solutions to really quite tricky challenges.
Okay, and James just had one question, I think. Is that mic now working?
Yeah, hi. There's, as you know, over probably the last 5 to 10 years, there's been a huge decline in political faith in the government from a country. And I often find when I mention the big government initiatives and programs, people go, oh yeah, that's the government, that isn't going to happen. Do you think it's worth considering, from Natural England's point of view, to try and get a message across of more independence and advice so you're not sort of lumped in? Because I think until there's a better faith in the departments and the system, the message isn't getting out to the wider community, which is obviously hugely important for the engagement and success of projects like this.
Well, I think it's fair to say that the political appetite for environmental improvement, it varies. And actually, during the course of my 5 short years in the chair at Natural England, I'm now on my 7th Secretary of State for the Environment. And they've had a variable level of appreciation of the importance and urgency of these subjects. But I personally live in hope that we will see continued long-term commitment to these subjects. And actually what we do at Natural England, irrespective of the changing political appetite, is we work to a series of legal codes and requirements that have been established by Parliament going back many decades. And so we will stick with that, which is now augmented by new policies, the Environmental Improvement Plan, backed by global frameworks like the Global Biodiversity Framework. And what we will do is continue to make the case to politicians of all persuasions that this is a very sound investment that we're putting into the recovery of nature, because it brings a wide range of benefits back to society, including in terms of public health, economic security, and resilience to climate change, amongst other things. And all of those things are very sensible to spend money on and to take tough political choices around. And we've got a lot of science, including from this program, which will help us continue to make that case. But I think, 40 years this year I've been involved in different roles in the environmental world, and the job is not done yet, and we're going to need to continue to make the case as we go along, because, as I say, the appetite kind of comes and goes, and hopefully at the moment it's in a place where it's coming back again. But that remains to be seen.
Excellent. Thanks, Tony. Please put your hands together for Tony again. Thank you.